Welcome to the Middlesex Moments radio show. I'm Dr. Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College, and I'm smiling broadly, even though you can't see it on the radio, because I have Richard Kamins here with me this morning, and we're going to be talking about anything that springs to mind. But in particular, we want to talk a little bit about Are You Now or Have You Ever Been, because you're in that show.
Yes, absolutely.
And you're going to play another role in addition to being in the show, which is you're going to talk about it before the play begins.
Right.
So I just want to remind everyone that it's Thursday night, April 5th, here on the campus of Middlesex Community College in Chapman Hall. Starts again at 6:30, and it's free, and we would love to have everyone from the community come and see this play because it's so incredibly important, especially now.
And that's the word I would use, important, because it brings up issues that we tend to sweep under the carpet sometimes. The idea of how people can be manipulated into believing things that aren't true. And so it happens all the time. I don't know why. The older I get, the more I realize, what are we trying to do? Push against the tide. But that's exactly what we're trying to do, is push against the tide.
It's something, I was thinking about it this morning and thinking, I wonder if people would hear that there's a play about the McCarthy era and think, I don't really want to go. Because to some degree, it's a real mark of shame in the history of this country. Something like the KKK would be, other things that we've done that we really aren't very proud of. On the other hand...
But we prefaced the play with, I think it was maybe a minute and a half video from the so-called Muslim hearings from last year in the House of Representatives that New York State Rep Peter King started, so to speak. And they speak to the only Muslim representative in the House, a gentleman from Michigan, I believe. And he breaks down in tears thinking about how Muslims have been stereotyped, and tells the story of a young man who died in 9/11 going back to rescue people. And he breaks down in tears. And I think that's what happens. I think, as you know, working with college students, stereotypes are so dangerous.
Right.
And it happens on a campus, it happens everywhere.
And these things, these times in our history kind of ebb and flow, and to some degree they're ebbing now, I think, because of this. There's so much discussion about immigration, for example. What was the period of time, the McCarthy era hearings were quite lengthy.
Yes, that's right. And these actually aren't the McCarthy hearings, these are the House hearings. McCarthy was a senator.
Oh, that's right.
So these started actually in the late 1930s, and they went right through like 1956 until Eisenhower put a stop to them.
Oh.
And
another good thing about Eisenhower.
Yes, an underrated president.
Yes, on review, he turns out to be an astounding person in so many ways. You know this because you're in the radio business. We have to take a break. I always hate pausing, but we will pause now and we'll come back. Well, we're back, and I'm so happy today to be talking with Richard Kamins and Don DeCesare, who's the manager of that president. I don't know. What's his title?
CEO.
Owner and CEO.
Yeah.
Reminded me that I should say who I am occasionally on the radio.
That's
so
true.
I'm going to repeat that I'm Anna Wasesha, and I'm so excited to be the president of Middlesex Community College and to have this half-hour radio show on your station.
Well, it's a treat for us, too, let me tell you.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Thank you. We were just talking about Dwight D. Eisenhower, who called a halt to these hearings, and he was, on review, one of the most spectacular presidents. Over the break, we were talking about the fact that he broke with tradition and gave a major speech at the end of his presidency in which he warned us about the military-industrial complex, and I think it's impossible to look around the world and not see the fruition of what he was so concerned about.
Well, it's interesting, and it's dangerous when you get me alone in a room and we can talk politics. I should never talk politics, but it's interesting to see the debates going on about healthcare as we speak. There's all these debates going on about healthcare. It's the Supreme Court, but the amount of money that goes into the military-industrial complex is just amazing. Mm-hmm. Just amazing.
Malcolm Moose was an incredible person. He helped to write that speech. Although it was, I'll tell you a story. He died. He died a very sad and lonely death, alone in a cabin in Minnesota. It was on a lake, because everything in Minnesota is on a lake. There was a boathouse, and everyone has a boathouse, which is where you put all the junk, your fishing tackle and things like that. And his children waited and waited and waited to clean that out, and got to a point where they absolutely had to do it. So one of his sons went in and pulled out some stuff in the back of the boathouse. Some of these things are really tiny. They look like phone booths. Some are a little larger. And there were these boxes. And what in the boxes were all of
Speeches that he wrote.
well, yes, including the help me with the word. It's the versions,
Right.
the drafts
yes.
of that particular speech. And it was clear from that Eisenhower was incredibly engaged in the writing of that speech, and it went back and forth many, many times, and that he had other people also look at it, because for him it was an historic moment, and it was the shaping of that idea that capitalism would merge with war and take on a life on its own that you could see take shape in these drafts. So what an amazing thing to find. So they put it in the Eisenhower Library. I mean, they were able, all the stuff that was probably underneath moldy little things, styrofoam containers that had degraded, that had worms in them and things. He was quite a character. And his wife, they had divorced, but she bought a house in a very marginal neighborhood in St. Paul, which is called Frogtown. And it's a great place, I tell you. It's where the community is so alive. And then, of course, some terrible things happened too. But she was artistic. We were talking about the arts during the 50s. She had everyone give her shoes. And she completely sided the house, the entire 2-story house, in shoes. So it was the shoe house. Yeah.
That's a well-heeled house.
Yeah,
very nice.
Exactly. So we should get back to the subject at hand.
Right.
If there was one.
Yeah, I think we were trying to get people to come to see Are You Now or Have You Overbid?
That's right.
Which is written by Eric Bentley, who's a British playwright, and actually I believe he's still alive. He's in his mid to late 90s. And he uses the transcripts from all these hearings. He must have had, talk about a lonely life, sifting through all these transcripts. And he didn't add anything to it. He just shaped the transcripts into the story of how the House Committee really sort of railroaded people. I mean, you've seen it already, and you saw what happened to the actor Larry Parks, who really just broke down. His career totally dissipated after his appearance at this in this committee. And Paul Robeson, one of the characters I play is Abe Burrows, who's one of the writers of Guys and Dolls. And Burroughs, he was, for him, this kind of flirtation with communism was just that, a flirtation. But how they carried it on a little farther, it's like saying, you have a rebel flag in your house, therefore you're Confederate and you're a bigot. Now, people get interested in all kinds of different things. And this tarring and feathering on a legal basis is a very dangerous thing, and it happens all the time. Now it happens in the press.
Right. And it distills down into these words that, liberal is another one of those words that can be used to condemn someone. And right. People, I sometimes think that the worst thing that's happened in the last 20 years is our transition into communicating information by way of PowerPoint presentations, because we begin to think then in bullets, right. As though there were no architecture underneath those bullets that led you to that conclusion. Right. And so socialist Europe is something that you hear quite a bit.
Well, I mean, today. All the people who call our president a socialist and who don't even know what socialism is.
That's my point, yeah.
Well, I think we probably talked about this on a number of occasions, and you probably have too, the whole idea of the instant news society we live in. You can get a news update every 5 minutes if you want, and they have to fill the spaces.
Right.
And they, instead of filling it with information, they fill it full of bullet points, and we know the danger of bullets.
So what do you think that someone coming to see this play who doesn't have any firsthand memory of the 1950s would think? What will they come away from the play thinking?
Well, that's a very good question. I think they will wonder how we got into this. And I think the biggest issue with this play and the way it's presented is there's no real timeline. So you don't know that it takes place over 15 years unless you know the characters involved, and many people don't. Many people don't remember Paul Robeson. Many people don't remember Abe Burrows, hard to believe, but it's true. And then there's Lionel Stander, who's in this play, who was a notorious actor and writer who got notorious because he was very funny and did lots of crazy things. And his career really was put on hold for like 20, 25 years. And I think people will probably see what damage can be done from hearsay, what damage can be done from, as we talked about, the tarring and feathering of people with a very wide brush, and wonder why it happened. And then, of course, they'll think, well, it was the communist threat, the whole idea of communism being able to infiltrate our society. And we worry about that all the time. Even today, I think, people worry about we mentioned socialism before, taking over this country, and we worry about the so many different things. I don't want to get too dire here, because the play has lighter moments too, but it does actually come to a fairly heavy climax with Paul Robeson. It was very smartly put together to put Paul Robeson at the end, because that wraps in racism.
Right.
And I don't want to give away much about the Paul Robeson part, because it asks a lot of questions. Robeson was very much a communist. Spends a lot of time sort of denying it, or actually pushing back against what the people are accusing him of, because he tries to bring it back to the idea of racism, and how, and especially when Robeson appeared before the committee, it was in the mid-50s, when things were starting to happen in Mississippi down south and in Alabama, and it was right before Martin Luther King came onto the scene. And Robeson was in the forefront of that. And these senators didn't want to hear that, because it was still a very racist society.
Yes, of course, even though the integration of the troops had taken place, some of the conditions and the segregation in this country were astounding. It's Women's History Month, and there was a presentation here on campus yesterday. You can help me with this, because you're so knowledgeable about the music world. There's an African-American woman who was a Connecticut person who was wanted to be an opera singer, but she was denied access initially to a vocal music
I don't
training
remember the
program.
name either.
Yeah.
But yeah.
She ended up being invited. Eleanor Roosevelt very publicly stepped away from the Daughters of the American Revolution because they refused to let this woman sing, and then she went to Capitol Mall.
Was it Marian Anderson?
Marian Anderson,
yes.
right. And she sang America the Beautiful.
Yep.
And there were like 70,000 people or something in the mall, and the photograph is iconic, and it's almost the same kind of icon as the Martin Luther King speech in the same place. And he apparently said, it was hearing her on the radio, again, the power of the radio, hearing her on the radio that made him decide to dedicate his life to public service. So, and it was just at that time in the 50s.
Well, and also seeing someone stand up.
Right.
Someone stand up and say, listen, I'm here. I mean, it was the time of The Invisible Man, the Ralph Ellison novel. And, I never thought about that. We studied it here when I went to MXCC.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
And I didn't think about the idea of invisible. And there's invisibility all around us. I remember my daughter went to San Francisco. She moved out to the Bay Area to take a job. And she couldn't believe all the homeless people on the street in San Francisco. And I said, but think of all the tour buses that go by all the time, and they don't see them. I mean, they see them, but it doesn't register because there's no name, there's no real face. I serve on the One Book, One Middletown committee, and we chose The Soloist a couple of years ago. And I'm going to forget the author's name. I'm terrible with names now. Barry Lopez, and it's about a schizophrenic African-American man who's a brilliant musician. It's like an idiot savant of some sort. If the reporter hadn't taken a side trip down the street and heard this guy playing or singing an aria, something, I forget exactly how it worked, he never would have met him. It was in being in the right place at the right time, and the reporter taking this man and making him, or at least making his life a little bit better. The guy's schizophrenia is still there. He still screams and yells and has issues, but he also can play piano, and he also can study his music, and he was able to bring him back into the world somewhat. And I realize, this is, there are people at the radio station who think I'm a helpless liberal. This is where I think we can make a difference, if we can see people as opposed to just driving by. Mm-hmm. And it's a very hard thing to teach. It's also a very hard thing to do.
Yeah, I want to talk about the teaching part of it, but we have to take another one of these breaks.
But I could talk.
We're on the radio.
I could talk a long time.
I'm happy to hear that. So we will break now, and then we'll be back talking with Richard Kamins. Well, welcome back. Richard Kamins is here today talking with me about a play called Are You Now or Have You Ever Been? That will be here Thursday, April 5th at 6:30 in Chapman Hall. It's free and open to the public, and the parking is free and open to the public, and it's right next to Chapman Hall, so it's on this beautiful hill looking
come on
out
up.
over. Come on up and see this play.
And it's not like Shakespeare in the Grove. We're going to do this inside.
It's inside. No mosquitoes.
It's not an action play either, so we don't have to worry about doing a lot of running around.
Right. In fact, it's a reader's theater to some extent.
That's correct.
And it's vintage players.
It is.
So it's a local group. So people who are into the buy local movement, as I am, should come in and patronize a play that is brought to you by your neighbors and friends who are members of this vintage players group.
Yeah. It's a fun group to be part of, because we have a lot of different people from different parts of the community. and that bring different strengths to the group. You've had Carolyn on the show. You know what great strength she brings, and other people who doing things that they don't normally do. I mean, we have several lawyers in the group. I've always said it's really great fun to step out of yourself and be someone else for a while. And whether it's a good or bad person, but you find out as much about yourself as you do about the person you're performing, I think.
What did
If
you
do
find
it
out
right.
about Abe Burrows?
A very funny, very clever man, and it made me go. He was actually he recorded a number of songs. He had a number of parodies that I hadn't heard of before. And the problem is even if I'm playing a role that I'm just reading, I'm just sitting there reading this part, I have to find out who this person is. Mm-hmm. So there's a number of websites online that had video of him being interviewed, that had songs that he sang. He was a entertainer who also was a great writer.
Did he compose the music for Guys
and Dolls? Yes, he did.
Oh, that is one of my most favorite plays. Yeah. It's really a fantastic play.
So at the time, and you'll hear this during the play, that the play was going on during the time of his testimony and was being optioned for Hollywood, and it got put down for a couple of years because of his involvement with the HUAC committee.
It's such a dark moment, and it's not a moment. Sad.
Dark era, so to speak.
Right, and there's a part of human nature, that fears the unknown.
Oh, absolutely.
And becomes suspicious. And
one of the things I've been doing the last couple of years, I teach in the fall at Quinnipiac, and I don't teach, I sort of facilitate. It's probably a better word, and it's interesting to see young people. I mean, 18, 19-year-olds, you deal with it here as well, although you get a much broader population than I see. Mm-hmm. And how little they know about what they do, how it can harm them in the eyes of the world. I hate to say it like that; it sounds so negative. But how you dress, people look at it still to this day.
Sure.
In such a free society, so to speak.
Right. I've got a pin that I saved from 1,000,000 years ago that says, "It's not who you are; it's what you wear."
Right. Well, it used to be "you are what you eat," right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. Well, I did want to touch on critical thinking. I read an essay just the other day that said that people who teach introduction to composition have to step back a moment and really ask whether or not they're teaching critical thinking when they ask first-year students in college to write research papers. And the reason they've asked them to step back is they've examined research papers at a perfect cross-section of the Research 1 institutions down to the community colleges and everything in between. And they actually went in and followed the citations and then read the articles that the citations had been imported from, and it was evident from the papers that the students had not read the context of what they had used to bolster their own argument. So a lot of synapses there in thinking, right. And yet we think that if we have a student construct an extended argument in a research paper, that we've finished the job of teaching critical thinking. Right. So, and you do this first-year seminar, right? So,
right.
So what's your take on all of that?
Well, what we've discovered and what I've discovered, because one of the good and bad things of this course is, even though we meet every year to talk about how we're going to shape the course again, everybody does it a little bit differently. And I've discovered that just what you said, when the kids write a paper, they don't really know how to put things into context. They know, well, Mr. Kamins wants to know that let's say Martin Luther King was jailed in Birmingham in 1957, and this is why. Well, what does it mean? What was it like? What was the time like? I mean, in essence, we should ask them to write one paper for the semester and just keep getting it better as it goes along. I think there was an article we read during the year, and I'm really, as I told you, I blank on names at times, but it talks about how you can read newspapers and articles online and you get to citations. You'll click on something with someone's name will be underlined, and you click on it, it'll take you to another article, and it'll take you to another article, and it'll keep you moving away from where you want to be. When you're writing a paper, it's great for when I'm at home, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I'm just reading something. But when I'm trying to write something, I have to be very careful about how we do it. And what we've discovered is that we've lost context. We don't understand history. And one of the things I realized halfway through the semester is, my students read something by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and there was a mistake in the book that we used, and it said copyright 2010. So they all thought he was contemporary.
Wow.
Yep. The John Stuart Mill article they thought he was contemporary. And he's writing about Great Britain, but they were saying, he said, he's talking about how our Senate does this and does that. And I said, oh, step back. So I think you really do. You have to start at the beginning and say, okay, this semester we're going to read this, 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 and this. Who are these people? What time did they live in? Mm-hmm. What was it like? I mean, you can, because on the internet you can search until you're blue in the face, but give it a little bit of context. You don't have to know everything about 1857 when John Stuart Mill wrote, but what was it like in England when he wrote? And make them work, it's a dangerous thing. Of course, it makes me work, which I love. So.
Exactly, yeah. Teaching is a wonderful thing to do. And really...
I came to it late in life, dangerous thing.
But I think if you really want to learn something, you teach it.
Right.
That's closes the loop.
Right.
Colleges and universities debate general education and the giant question: what is it that makes an educated person? I mean,
right.
What would we see if we found one?
Well, I would like to think, and I had a great experience here because I had a wonderful teacher named Boris Burak who died way too young. I think I told you about this. He died in 1968 in a terrible car crash, and but he was the person, probably the most important person, to teach me that it doesn't stop when you walk out the door. The learning doesn't end when you close the book. The learning doesn't end when you get your degree. And one of the nice things that what goes on here at Middlesex is the Institute of Lifelong Learning, the MILE program.
It is a terrific program.
And there are people in there in their 70s and 80s, and they want to know. Why is it? I mean, they've lived this long. Why do things happen why do things still go on the way they go on? Don't people learn? While we're learning all the time, don't they learn?
Right, and and you're looking at anticipating the birth of a grandchild any moment now, but I bring this up to say this is why educators are so important and teachers are so important, because we all start out knowing very little,
right?
Almost nothing.
Well, there's a wonderful. I read something in the Jewish mysticism that says you actually know everything you need to know right before you're born. And all of a sudden, you come into the world and you forget it all.
That's
and
right.
It's getting back to that state that you had before you were born. So I must have an incredibly intelligent grandchild because he's so overdue. That's how I look at it.
He's clinging to the reality that
right.
he's
He's probably reading War and Peace, and it's taking him too long to get out.
I'm going to email you a poem that Robert Bly wrote about forgetting, and it's exactly what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually, he wrote it, I think, because of how we know as we get older, we know people we love who begin to stop out a little bit.
Right.
They don't remember things,
right.
And then they sometimes don't remember anything.
Right, and which is a scary thing. I think that scares most people.
Right.
I mean, as scary as this play is, let's bring things back to the play.
Yeah.
Or Have You Ever Been? And how people can be railroaded into admitting something they didn't really do, and it tars and feathers them for the rest of their lives. Losing one's memory is just probably the worst thing in the world. I mean, I can't imagine what it'd be like not to be able to pick up a book and read it and have it resonate. Mm-hmm. So I think that's, to me, probably the scariest thing in the world.
Well, and I get to extrapolate from that. I will leap from that lily pad to another one, that's why this play is so important.
Right. Because we forget.
Exactly.
And I think that's what Carolyn saw when she saw, Carolyn Kirsch, we're talking about the director, when she saw that little bit on CNN about Peter King and what went on in this hearing, it reminded her of this play. And that's the lovely leap of imagination. Oh, well, this has happened before. Mm-hmm. And it happened before that, and it happened before that.
Yeah, and I'd do a shout out for Carolyn and for the Vintage Players, because you take that moment, that epiphany, mm-hmm. and then you do something about it. Yeah.
We bring it out, and it's fun to work on, and it keeps growing every time we do it. I think it gets better, and that's.
All right. Well, this has been a wonderful half hour with you.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
And my daughter lives in Washington, D.C., as does yours. And so I will have in my mind a wonderful picture of you in this beautiful place. It's quite a bit warmer there than here.
Yes, it is. It's true.
And the cherry blossoms are in bloom.
Yes,
and that'll
are.
be a great way to mark the memory of this child's birth.
Yeah.
The cherry blossoms. in Washington, D.C. So thank you so much for being here
Thank
today.
you.
This has been the Middlesex Moments radio show. And if our listeners are interested in learning more about Middlesex Community College, Richard Kamins is an alum of this college, graduate of the first class. We have a website, which, they didn't even dream of
That's
back
right.
at that time.
Oh, good Lord, yes. We had to go to libraries.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, so we're at mxcc.edu. We have an address in the World Wide Web, in that amazing universe out there. I'm Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College, wishing you a good day.